Welcome to our special council meeting for May 12th, 2025, starting at 6 p.m. I will now call the meeting to order. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Cressman, seconded by Councillor Dunstall. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. We have gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga peoples. We want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should only take what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community. Councillors, there were additions to the agenda. They are additional individuals planning on delegating, as well as another piece of correspondence which was circulated to Council earlier today. So the recommendation is that the agenda be adopted as presented. May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, this evening we do have 9 specific interest delegations who have registered to address Council. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to address Council. I'd like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Those who are joining us in person, please proceed to the podium when you are called upon to speak. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate removal from the meeting. This includes interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, turning your camera on at inappropriate times, and/or hate or defamatory comments. One last reminder for delegations, do not take offense if following your presentation there are no questions from Council. This is Council's time to really listen and reflect upon the opinions and ideas shared with us from our community members. And although it is rare, I would like to remind delegates and members of the public that failure to adhere to appropriate quorum may result in their microphone being muted and/or removal from the meeting. And out of respect for all meeting participants, I kindly ask that those in the gallery remain seated unless exiting the chamber, and to avoid from personal conversations and expressions of support or opposition to those speaking, in order to allow everyone to hear the proceedings as they occur. So when we do get to the items of this evening's delegation we are speaking to, I will call upon each delegate when it is their turn. Also, just a reminder, as this is a special meeting specifically about the Prime Minister's path, I would ask that you keep your remarks to new information and items. So if you did hear somebody else at length share comments that you agree with, if you could please just make note of that, and then move along to your new points that you would like to mention to Council. So with all of that being said, the recommendation that we have before Council is a report CAO-2025-10 be received for information, and that that the Wilmot Prime Minister's Path Working Group recommendations be sent to Council as included as Attachment 1 be received for Council consideration, and that Council refer the report of the Prime Minister's Path Working Group recommendations to the June 2nd Committee of the Whole meeting. To get this on the floor, may I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. Before we actually jump into the report, I understand that there's a request for an amendment to change the date on when this is returning to Council. Councillor Dunstall?
Yes, thank you, through Mayor. Yes, I'm looking to have the date amended to July 28th.
And just to make note, you're requesting this as we have councillors missing from...
Yes, I'm requesting this. This was one of the major topics that my constituents had, and I'd like to be part of the debating process. I cannot make the June 2nd meeting, and I believe one of my co-councillors cannot the June 28th meeting at the end. So we'd like to have it moved to July if that's possible. Okay,
so that's been moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. Any comments on that amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. In terms of the proceedings for tonight as well, just a reminder that tonight is more of a information and listening night for Council, so we will not be making a decision on any of the recommendations this evening or any other decisions of Council. This really is our opportunity as kind of the next step to both hear from our consultants here about how their process worked, and then to hear, of course, from the residents who are delegating or have sent in correspondence. So it will now be at the July 28th meeting that council will actually be deliberating and diving into the options and discussing next steps. So just so that everybody's aware of how the night's going to proceed, this really is another input evening for council to really get all of this information culminated in one place. And with that, I will invite our Director of Corporate Services and CFO, Greg Clark, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, to council and the public. I think it's pretty clear what we're here to discuss, Prime Minister's path tonight. And with us, we have from Laura, Denise, I'm not going to pronounce your last name, Denise, Benny Skinner, and Hassana Mayer. And they're here to help us, or to present to you, Council, the findings of the work they've undertaken over the last 7 months, engaging with the public. And so Denise has a short presentation she's going to go through, provide you with that background of the actions they took, the exercises they carried out, who they talked to, and what they heard, and how the recommendations came to be, and through working with the working group. I'll also add a little bit of context around, from staff's perspective, around the working group's recommendations and how they may impact the organization as a whole. And then that'll open the floor to delegates. And if there's council questions about the process or anything that's happened over the last 7 months, we're here to answer those.
Thank you very much. And with that, are there any direct questions for Director Clark at this time? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Greg, and also just a huge thank you for leading the staff team side of this project, and as well as to our additional staff. I know Candace played a big hand as staff in it, as well as Carly, who's now off on mat leave, but thank you very much on your team for supporting our consultants throughout this project. It was really greatly appreciated. So as I did mention earlier, we do have 9 registered delegations on this topic. So we will start with our delegations, and then we will, my apologies, just one moment here. Just give me one moment. Sorry, just wanted to confirm, my paper was not up to date. We are going to have, in fact, our consultants come present first to council and to the gallery, so I will invite up Denise and Benny, as well as Hassana, to please introduce and give us your findings.
Thanks so much. Thank you, and welcome. Welcome to this evening. I'm going to thank you for doing the land acknowledgement. I just want to draw our attention to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, the agreement to share the resources of the land. And today that means to share all of the things, the space, the air in terms of the space we take up, and also communities where we live, where we do business, where we go to school. Also, the 2-row Wampum Belt Covenant, which in its essence was an agreement to live in friendship and peace between the Indigenous folks who lived here and then the settlers that came. And that those two things were made with the understanding that it was in perpetuity, that it would go on and on and on and on and on and on and on forever to this day. And something that we have honored through this process, and wanted to just call attention to that. And then also the Haldimand Treaty that allowed for the 6 miles on either side of the Grand River to be land that the Indigenous folks stewarded, again, in perpetuity forever and ever and ever and ever. And also to call into our minds the history of Castle Kilbride and the settlers that came to this land and people that have called this place home for many years. And folks that are currently calling this place home. That we all have connections to this space, we all have connections to this land, and it's useful and helpful to have that in our minds as we go through today's agenda. If you would switch slides, please, and thank you. We are going to give you a little bit of a history of the project. We're going to tell you some of the engagement initiatives and some of the engagement activities that happened, just go through what that looked like over the last 6 months, 7 months. We'll go over the recommendations with you. You'll have some comments back from Greg, and then a final reflection on that, and then we'll take questions from you. If you go to the next one. The project team was from Laura originally. My name, Denise, I will say my last name one time. You never ever have to say my last name, but Sweetan O'Leary is my last name. Benny Skinner was also the co-facilitator of this process and project, and also Hasna Mayer, who is a superstar and has kept us very on track and kept all the notes and taken everything that you've all said and kept it all together, because I would not have been able to do that. And then also Greg and Carly and Candace from the township, who have been super helpful as well. And then just a little bit about the Collective Reflections Future Directions Initiative, as that's what we have called this. The sort of project itself was designed to engage the community, to focus on hearing voices, bringing people back to the table, and using a variety of tools to meet people where they were at in the community and where they were at in their process of this issue and this concept in the community, and navigate the complex issue that was the PMP in this community. The goal was to figure out how to move forward, and to move forward in a positive way that accounted for the diversity of Wilmot as a community, and to also hold the complexity of this particular issue and Canada's history in a way that honored all the different voices and all the different people who came to the table. This process has taken 7 months, which feels like a really long time, and considering this project has been going on since 2012, it's a very short time in the grand scheme of things, and yet it really engaged so many different people. And so just a bit of acknowledgement in terms of contributions, first and foremost to yourselves as the people who made decisions about bringing in a consulting team and wanting to reopen this issue and hear again from the community. You came with open-mindedness and trusting the process and supporting the engagement, and being open to just taking a step back and letting things unfold in front of you, and that deserves definitely deep appreciation. It's hard sometimes to just kind of let things unfold, and you did such a fabulous job of doing that. And then also there are some members from the working group here, but just want to acknowledge their time and the effort that they put in. It was, as you can imagine, a very challenging process to have 12 people in a room who were very specifically chosen to be at different ends of the spectrum. And they put a lot of energy and work into that. And then also deep acknowledgement and gratitude for the community. They showed up, they also trusted the process, and they shared and participated and went through all of this with us. I'm going to turn it over to Benny to say a little bit about the history of the project.
Hello, thank you for having me. Volume's okay, everything, yeah. So for those folks who are not familiar with some of the documents that are included in this project, we created a historical timeline. That was mostly something that I undertook because we realized that a big part of this project is the historical timeline of it, and the complexities that we saw and the different points of fracture in the community are kind of embedded in throughout the history. So if we just go to the next slide here. We created this document. Obviously it's entitled The Historical Timeline. In terms of the process, for sources I used publicly available documenting. So I used a lot of newspaper articles. If you go through the actual document, you'll see that rather than trying to pull together bits and pieces of what people were telling us, I went straight to public record that was available both online and also via newspapers. So I had a few community members. They were very helpful in providing actual stacks of newspapers about this project for me to go through and summarize. And so another thing as part of this timeline was summarizing these sources, but then also a little bit of analysis. I tried to keep it at a minimum and disclose when that analysis was taking place, knowing that it's from my positionality. So I'm a socio-political scientist, so that's part of what I do professionally. And to keep it short, there was some really key takeaways here that we learned about. One of the things is the importance of common understanding a lot of folks had bits and pieces of the narrative, and because it was such an emotional experience, I think for a lot of community members, not having the entire picture, it caused a lot of anxiety for a lot of folks. I put in some of the slides some big themes and learnings that we found throughout putting this document together, and then we also took the time to shed light on the socio-political context that was surrounding each big piece of the event. So year by year, there were certain critical political movements that would have impacted thoughts and feelings towards this project, and also towards the narrative that was being constructed around this project, which I think is really important. Next slide, please. Oh, never mind, back slide. So in terms of, I'll summarize the big themes for you, but one of the biggest things was that I noticed that a lot of the reporting focused on these polar opposites that appeared to exist in Wilmot Township, and we do know that there are people who have varying opinions on the matter. However, as we did our engagement, we realized that there was common ground that was not highlighted in the reporting throughout the last few years. So I'm not going to stand here and blame the media for being subjective, because of course people who are writing these articles are human beings, and that's going to show through in the reporting on the events. But a lot of the media coverage of this over the last few years has been very oppositional in nature, rather than highlighting some of the key congruencies that we actually found. So we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we noticed that one, a desire for an educational opportunity on the history of this country is something that people, regardless of their opinion on the statues, thought was of value. And then the other thing was the questions and the comments about the budget implications of this project. But that also was something that was congruent across the political spectrum. Those things were not, I would say, highlighted in the reporting over the last, 8-9 years on this project. And so I think that that's an important thing for us to look at. And also, I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody, but of course, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic, big movements like Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, Land Back movements. They were exponentially visible throughout the last few years, and that heavily impacted what was going on, and I think heavily impacted the way that this project was reported on. So hopefully people are able to go through the historical timeline and see, the pieces of how this progressed, and see, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the project itself, and the way it kind of transpired. And then this is me still? All right, awesome. Next slide, please. So in terms of the engagement commitment, so we were, when we received the request, and then we submitted a proposal, and then we also submitted our engagement plan, we realized that this was not just as easy as figuring out how to build a park, right? A lot of people noted that the feelings of polarity in the community, and the harm that people had experienced, and a lot of the emotions. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was truth as a critical concept to this process. Again, regardless of people's side of the political spectrum, everybody was really invested in this idea of truth. So we made some commitments in our engagement process. We were committed to the concept of true history, and as we all know, history is spoken, it's written, it's recorded. A lot of construction occurs, and so when we think of true history, we don't just think of one narrative of history. We think of diverse narratives that come together to create a more cohesive picture. We also had a commitment to the land. We all know that this is Mother Earth, and that she gives us everything that we need to survive and to thrive and to grow. So commitment to honoring the land and respecting the land. We have already noted across the room the pre-contact treaties, thinking about the dish with one spoon, and then we also had the commitment to the post-contact treaties, which Denise already mentioned, things like the two-row wampum, which is relevant to this geographical area, especially in terms of the Haudenosaunee relations to settlers in the region. We from the very start, we wanted to commit to community. and centering community voices, because a lot of the fracture, I think, was felt by the community in terms of feeling like their voices were not heard, and we really wanted to address that piece. And we know that one of the challenges of prior engagement work was the COVID-19 pandemic. So now we had the opportunity to, again, have some really big opportunities for people to engage. And we had a commitment to hearing all voices. So we had a very large influx of emails, visits, phone calls, all the types of communication on this, and we recorded all of these notes. So thank you to Hasna also again for recording all of this, and we have all of that data that we've collected, and we found that there's a very diverse group of voices in Wilmot. I'm sure that also comes as no surprise to the folks in front of me and the folks behind me, but that was really important for us as well in this process. In terms of the Indigenous engagement, we wanted to have a really accessible process. So the thing about this project that was really vital was that there had already been so much inflammation where a lot of people, Indigenous or not, did not feel necessarily safe coming to community gatherings right at the start of this process, and we recognized that. And so what we did was we designed a process implementation that would allow us to make this accessible to people who did not necessarily want to come and step into a room where they had potentially been harmed before. So we created something called the CRANE method. This method is something that I designed. It's inspired by Anishinaabe traditional governance, it's an incredible system of governance, and one of the positions in that traditional system is the position of the crane. And so the role of the crane traditionally would be to go to other communities or to go to other places and relay information back and forth. That's essentially like, you know, this kind of very open diplomat who was tasked with that. And so we gave people the opportunity to request for us to meet with them in a space where they were comfortable to talk about their thoughts and feelings on the Prime Minister's path in in its entirety. And what we found was that this was really helpful in terms of accessibility for folks who have felt on the margins, so racialized individuals, Indigenous individuals, but it also was heavily utilized by non-Indigenous and non-racialized folks as well, who wanted to have kind of a little bit of that degree of separation while they engaged with our process. So it opened up a lot of opportunities to have those in-depth conversations with people who were really invested in this process for the last few years, and we were really happy that people took us up on this opportunity. So we heard people's opinions, we heard people's ideas, and we heard a lot of commonalities, which we'll get into in the rest of the presentation. Awesome. I think that's you, Denise. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to flip the page. Okay, so this there are values that are inherent to this process, and those values, right from the get-go, transparency was something that we heard, both from all the councillors, but also from the community, and also centering equity, care, and collaboration throughout this process. It was designed for us to really listen, and we designed it around these pillars of listen, share, learn, and engage. Listening to each other, listening to the history, listening to the community, sort of all of the multi-ways that people needed to receive information, but then also sharing information, so feeling comfortable to step into a room and sharing where you were at and how you felt, and sharing experiences, and being able to take those experiences in empathetically, and really understand how other people experienced histories and history both writ large in terms of Canada's history, but history in terms of this community and this issue in this community. Learning was sort of at the helm of this, in terms of sharing information that folks might not have. And what we heard from a lot of people throughout this was, I just didn't know. I haven't heard that before. I didn't know that that was the case. And so embedding learning in this process was really important. And not just learning, again, on a sort of an academic from an academic perspective or from a data perspective, but also learning about other people in your community and hearing about where other people were at. And then the invitation to engage, to really deeply come to the table and participate and co-create throughout this process, and allowing residents to feel like they had that option to co-create this process. The method for us was really doing this as a people-centered approach, so designing for people and not for outcomes. When we started this, we didn't necessarily have the clearest vision of where we would get to, but we were really invested in how the process would allow us to get to an end, and allowing for that process to be iterative and multi-layered, so that it sort of adapted to the community as things started to come out with as much emotion and feelings and personal experience as was part of this process. Benny and I really wanted to design something that allowed for us to be responsive to what came out of the community, and have the community feel like the process was responsive to what they needed. It was people-centered and relationship-focused. I remember doing 9 media interviews when we had our first community tea circle, wondering what the heck a tea circle was. And really, my response to that at the time was, tell me what you imagine that to be. And really what we wanted was to create a space that felt like community, that felt like you would just have a cup of tea with your neighbors and have a conversation, and allowing us to meet people where they were at, and have it be accessible and trauma-informed, and really create safe spaces and brave spaces for the folks who decided to participate. The reach, over 10,000 people were engaged in this process. We obviously have no way of confirming which are novel, new, it wasn't 10,000 people individually, but there were 10,000 connects with different people across the region. Over 90% of the people were local residents, and the folks who were not local residents were people from the region, so you weren't having this sort of mass influx of people coming from outside of the region. And the folks that we spoke to that were not from Wilmot but were from the region are people who had some kind of vested interest. They either used to live in Wilmot or they come to Wilmot all the time or whatever, so really a very hyper-local engagement process. And we found that opinions ranged from full removal to full reinstatement. But I think what we found is that the initial belief was that this was a binary option of statues or no statues, and what we actually found as we heard more and more voices was that there was really most people fell in the middle, and there was a very layered tapestry of how people felt and what was important to them and how they wanted things to sort of come to light, and hence the recommendations that you currently have in front of you. So if you would go to the next slide. This is a logic model that Benny will go through shortly, but I want to tell you a little bit about the recommendations first. So, thank you so much. How we got here, what are they, what do they say, and what do they mean? This was a collaborative process of community voice and then the working group process. So the working group was an integral part of this, and like we've talked about, the working group was intentionally designed as a group of 12 people who represented Wilmot Township in terms of the diversity as close as we could possibly get, from age to gender to socioeconomic status to length of time living in the community, but as well represented the difference of opinions that might exist in the community. So everywhere from the, put them back up to take them down completely, and then all of the sort of middle ground as well. That working group plus the voices from the community that came through in all the community engagement. I described it in the first initial community gathering as a ping pong game, that sort of co-created process where information would come from the community, we would take it back to the working group would process it, we would go back to the community to get more information and bring it back, and on we went for the last 6 months. And it was a bringing together of various thoughts and ideas and experiences. What the recommendations are not is that they are not about choosing sides. They are about holding the complexity of all of the various experiences and thoughts and opinions that exist in Wilmot Township, and holding those pieces with care and inclusion and transparency and intention. What the recommendations offer, they're a roadmap for moving forward. They're a roadmap for what needs to be done or what needs to happen in order to move forward as a community in a collaborative way that does something to account for all of the various experiences and voices that we heard throughout this process that exist here in Wilmot Township. It's a path forward with care and accountability, ensuring that What Comes Next centers inclusion, education, history, and reconciliation meaningfully, holding the pride and the pain gently with intention and with consciousness is what they are. So, next slide, please. The recommendations, as you know, there's sort of 6 categories of recommendations, and these were the sort of key themes of what we heard from the community. These are the things that were the most important to the community, and the things that we continue to hear over and over again. Starting with governance and structure, this is something, these ideas sort of were whispers in the community context, but they really were solidified in the working group. The idea that there should be some body that moves this forward, that if this is going to continue, if this is going to be a thing, then there needs to be somebody, or not somebody, one person, but there needs to be a body that helps to move this forward. So a steering committee of sorts that would lead the next steps and ensure accountability and represent the diverse community voices and ensure that all the pieces are being taken care of as it moves forward. The second piece that came up probably the most often was the idea of funding. I can't say unanimously because we didn't collect data in a quantitative way, but as close to unanimously as I can say without saying unanimously, funding was something that came up that folks did not want money from the township to go into this project beyond potentially maintenance, but any capital expenditures should not come from the township, and that if the project was to move forward, it needed to be funding backed in some way, whether that was through granting or private donation, but that funding needed to be secured and planned for in order for the project to move forward. The third key theme that came up was inclusion, and there's a sort of difference between inclusion and truth and reconciliation. Inclusion being that many diverse voices should be invited to the table, and that those diverse voices would be included as co-creators of this project moving forward to ensure that that all voices were heard and represented, and that we don't end up in the same situation the next iteration of this project, to ensure that there's an effort made to be inclusive and to hear all voices. And those voices would be included as co-creators from planning to implementation of whatever the next step of this project is. Fourth, education. The past education plan came up a lot, but also more education and more thoughtful and thorough education came up, and that it had to be foundational to if there was what the next iteration of the installation would be. Resources and context and critical reflection must be key pieces of the public understanding of this project and the history of this project and the history of Canada through this project. 5 is location. The display must be in a space that invites intentional engagement. One of the problems of the past display was that folks didn't get an opportunity or option to choose whether or not they wanted to engage. There was sort of feedback that this thing that caused harm for so many people was just kind of in their face, and they had to drive by it or walk past it or look at it from their balcony or whatever. And so that space has to be considered in terms of a non-passive experience, and that there has to be informed consent as much as possible with the content of whatever the next iteration is. And then finally, but also very importantly, the project must actively support truth-telling, healing, long-term reconciliation goals, listening, and there's a series of questions that came up that ask how we're doing things and whether or not those things are decentering dominant voices and making space for other folks. And that process of, truth and reconciliation should be an integral part of this project, but also a call to action in terms of including that process and those questions in other things that the township might undertake as part of their projects and this community. Next slide. I'm going to let Benny go through the logic model with you. Yeah.
Hello.
So in recognition of how multi-layered this, the issue has been, and also the solution, in turn needs to kind of be a little bit multi-layered as well. We wanted to create something visual for people also to understand the recommendations through, because it's kind of like in list format, great for people whose brains do that, and also for folks who would prefer to see something a little bit more visual. We provided this as well. So I know it's a little bit hard to see on the screen there. Hopefully people will have printed copies that they'll be able to look at. But if you take a look at this logic map, basically we go through each recommendation. It's kind of like, this was inspired by those teen magazine quizzes that you would do to find out which Jonas brother you were going to marry, in a way. And but essentially we created this logic map. So essentially we formulated questions in order to guide people through the recommendations using that step-by-step piece. So you start, and we know that people wanted to know the question of, okay, how do these statues come back if they are coming back? So you start at the question of, has the township created a steering committee in order to address that first recommendation of the governance? If you've done that, then you go ahead and you continue through the path. So we continued, has the steering committee established a funding plan? If not, then you go to recommendation number 2. It's pretty straightforward in terms of, how you would follow it. So hopefully everybody is able to do that. I don't think I'll spend too much time on it, because it is really, it's the easy part, I would say, to just go through this roadmap.
Yeah, thanks, Bunny. And we're going to turn it over to Greg for some comments.
Yeah, I think. So, thank you, Denise, Benny, for the presentation. As I mentioned, the internal team made up of myself, Carly, and Candace were working behind the scenes to facilitate not only the work that Laura was doing, but also engage with staff here at the administration facility and across the organization, because this project impacted staff of the township directly in many ways. And so we wanted to make sure that we were understanding how staff felt and giving them a perspective and a voice that we could bring to council in coordination with these recommendations. And so first thing I want to say is the project as a whole was tremendous in terms of the recommendations and the work that we got to. And I think from our staff's perspective, they felt that the project was done very well, that the engagement was great, that the voices were heard, that people felt enabled to be a part of it as an individual and a resident or a citizen of the township. And they felt that they were informed on what was going on. So staff were really pleased with what was going on. We touched base with them 3 times throughout the process directly, and at each point they felt like they were informed. They knew what was going on and what was happening, which was one of the critical things. We didn't want the corporation to feel sort of left out of this process. And from that engagement, there was 2 things that came out of that conversation. And the first one is capacity. And so as the recommendations sort of developed and came to life, there's a lot of work involved in implementing those recommendations. And one of the things that staff want to make clear is that as an organization, this is not something that we are resourced for. We don't have the staffing and capacity of a large organization that might have a culture department that could take on something like this. We have our staff in the castle, but they're geared towards the castle. They are not a culture department that is doing all kinds of culture. They're here to do the castle. And so we don't have the capacity to lead a steering committee and engage in the fundraising and all those initiatives that would be required. And that's why that steering committee recommendation is phrased the way it is, that it's an external body outside of the township that takes ownership and direction of the path forward and oversees the whole project into the next steps. And we think that's really important too when it ties into the budget and funding. As Denise said, it was very clear that a lot of citizens don't feel that or the majority of citizens don't feel that taxpayer dollars should continue to fund this project. And to do this project properly, there's resources to get it up and running, but there's also a lot of resources for the education, the upkeep and maintenance of education. We all know that history is not static. We learn new things about history every day, and we would hate for this initiative to become static, and in a few years it's very outdated and not relevant. So there's going to be a lot of investment to keep it static as well. While the statues are donated, the land and implementation of them is significant when you get up to, I think we're on Prime Minister number 25 now. So if we see ourselves getting there, that's a significant amount of upkeep, maintenance, and renewal. Even once you set the statues in, there's a lot of work that goes in from our parks and operations folks to maintain pathways, maintain the statues, maintain the area around it. And as that area grows, and with some of the recommendations about separation and sort of that informed consent, there's going to be more opportunity for maintenance and upkeep that are going to be needed. So we want to make sure that that's clear, that council understands the level of commitment that would be required to carry out that. The second piece that came out is a reflection of the previous installation of the statues and some of the harm that it did internally to staff. The impact of having the statues here was not just felt by the community, but it was felt directly by people within the administration building, in that people's opinions, whether they were pro or against the statues, spilled over into the administration building. And so we, as employees here, this is where we come to work every day, and we were in a number of staff brought this forward. They were put in positions where they were accosted or approached by people who were voicing their concerns and their opinions about something that they saw on the property, but really our staff had no ability to change or do anything about. And so they were put in a position where we don't ever want to see our staff put in that position where they're being accosted for any reason, but in particular something that they have no control and impact over. And so we want to, when we talk about location, we feel that it's very important that council be very thoughtful about the location, and that the location, while township land may seem like an appealing spot, it does impact those employees of the township who must then maintain and work around them. So there is still a portion of that impact that needs to be recognized if it is township land, and that needs to be considered before a decision on the placement of the statues, if they are to come back, is made. Overall, I think, the last thing I want to say is that we as a organization and a team that worked on this, we're very pleased with the work that was done. We're very appreciative of the community and the working group and everything that they put in. We see the effort that was put into the community, and we're very, very proud of this work. I know Candace and Carly have talked about that a lot. We knew this was going to be a ton of work, and it was. But I think what we've received from Laura and from the public, we can all be very proud of, and we were very proud to present this to you and pass this back to council and put it back in your hands to make decisions going forward. So, thank you.
I'll just a quick reflection on what the recommendations are and what this process has been, and then we can hand it back over to you. But the PMP, Collective Reflections and Future Directions engagement process, began in the shadow of a difficult and polarized community issue that was often framed as a stark binary on the future of the Prime Minister's path: preserve it or remove it. Over the course of 7 months, through thousands of contributions, conversations, and courageous acts of participation, the community moved beyond this binary. Residents of Wilmot Township came forward to live the values that guided this process: to listen, to share, to learn, and to engage. They listened, not just to those they agreed with, but to neighbors with different perspectives, different histories, and different experiences of the Prime Minister's path. They shared their memories, their pride, their pain, their fears, their hopes, and their hopes for what the future could hold. They learned by taking part in the tea circles, gatherings, and surveys that ask difficult questions and encourage deeper reflection on history, identity, and belonging. They engaged by trusting the process enough to return to a challenging conversation, by joining the working group, by filling out surveys, and by contributing ideas for a future shaped by a community voice. The working group saw themselves as a microcosm of the broader community, a small and diverse group grappling with the full complexity of history, identity, and reconciliation. In many ways, Wilmot Township itself stands as a reflection of Canada. a community seeking to find a way to both hold the pride and the pain of our shared history without erasing or ignoring either. The recommendations that emerge from this process are not a singular solution, nor do they represent unanimous agreement. Instead, they attempt to honor the wide range of experiences, perspectives, and values present across Wilmot Township. They reflect a collective effort to imagine a future that is transparent, inclusive, and rooted in truth. This process demonstrated that even in the face of polarization, communities can choose dialogue over division. They can choose to listen more deeply, share more honestly, learn more openly, and engage more fully. That choice is what Wilmot residents made again and again throughout this process, and is perhaps the strongest foundation on which to build the future of the PMP and the future of Wilmot Township as a whole.
Thank you very much. And just again, thank you so much for all the work that you have all collectively done, including those in the community who have contributed in various ways. It's greatly appreciated, and I know this council, it was one of the hot button issues when we were outdoor knocking and eventually elected. So it's really fantastic to see that we've moved to another step in this process. And thank you again for everything that you have all done to get us to this point. So with that being said, I do want to note, Councillor Martin, thank you for joining us virtually. Good to see you. And do any of council have questions for our consultant? Councillor Dunstall.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. First, I want to thank Denise and Benny, and I did want to state that any conversations I had with both of you were great. I appreciate that you're willing to meet people where they were, so that was really good. One of the things, Benny, that you said was that it was important to have the entire picture, and that used mainly public documents and newspaper articles. But then later you also mentioned that the newspaper articles seemed pretty one-sided and oppositional. So I was wondering how you counterbalance that.
Yes, thank you for that question. I think a lot of the counterbalancing did occur in the analysis piece, where what I did was I took those articles, I summarized them, but then I also would, in time, I was reflecting back some of the things we were hearing from community and just noting, the way the engagement was going is diverging from what this article seems to have reported. So when you go through the document, you'll see those little tidbits there where I try to kind of balance it and give these perspectives. I also did try to, rather than going to one newspaper, I tried to get a variety of newspapers as well, because even though they were polarizing often, there was newspapers that were polarized in one way and newspapers that were polarized another way, so I was able to try and balance them by putting them kind of next to each other, especially when they were reports from the same week. I would put them all kind of in sequence. I actually put them in chronological order so that people could see who was reporting what. And we tried to balance it that way the best that we could, while being transparent about what we didn't know. So yeah, as much as I've noted that the full picture is really important, I'm not sure any of us will ever really have a true full picture, because a lot of things were happening in the background and amongst community members that obviously impacted the situation, but weren't necessarily something that we could or should have reported on, just because it would have been private information amongst folks. But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Benny.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes. In reading the attachments, I was, many of the things I agree with, and one of the things I thought was, I heard from Denise early on, was how do you maintain or prevent scope creep in terms of the task that was set before you? Because I read some of these recommendations and wonder, it's almost an impossible task set before whoever would take this on, to ensure that everybody feels included, they feel belonged, they're not, moved to the side, marginalized, whatever. And so I'm just kind of wondering, how do you manage scope creep in that process, and how do you set boundaries that something could be achieved without, regardless of what the path forward is. It almost seems an impossibility as I read the report and said, if we try to achieve all these things, you know, it's, anyhow, I guess that's about it.
Yeah, scope in this project is a very big conversation, as we can all probably feel the weight of that. And I think it's interesting. I don't see it as impossible, only because a lot of people told us what we now have to present to you today was not something we were going to come across. The fact that we were able to get people of such a diverse opinion into the room to sit down and actually start to flesh these things out, that was a massive win on its own, which I think for both Denise and I solidified the fact that even if something feels very, very daunting, Wilmot Township, I think, can overcome a lot of those challenges. And one of the things in terms of scope creep, I think what people are really looking for is for the project to be co-created and then to have those boundaries be co-created. So it's not to say that there aren't boundaries on the project. There is some notes with folks in the community that was reflected in the data of, well, what kind of checkpoints are we going to use to tell history if not the prime ministers? And that's a great question. And finding those checkpoints, it kind of serves as a bit of a boundary, right? Because we all know that we can't tell the entire, every single detail of history. It just simply is not possible. So I think what is more important is that the scope is determined in collaboration with different voices from different demographics, rather than worrying about what the scope will actually be. I think that when you sit people together at the table, what we found is that even voices that appear oppositional, they balance each other out, going back to that idea of balance. And if you just wiggle everyone a little bit closer together, you can find where your scope needs to lie in order to satisfy, quote unquote, satisfy most opinions.
Any additional questions, councillors? Councillor Wilkinson?
Through the chair, thank you. When reading through the report and also corresponding with some of my constituents and members of the community, and even some of the correspondence that is included in tonight's agenda publicly, there's been a bit of a concern about lack of information, control of information, or information that was purposely left out, or opinions that were purposely left out. And the allegation is essentially one that the process was very controlled and almost had a, we'll say a bias or a somewhat controlled narrative to move forward. So for those folks that feel as though the information was left out or that their opinion was devalued, how do you respond? How can we take this for fact when there are folks out there that feel as though they were overlooked entirely?
I'm going to go again. Also a really great question. I think one of the really key things for us in terms of making sure that people were able to recognize where the opinions were coming from, because we did hear this as a feedback of the prior engagements as well. Part of the reason why we wanted to have these tea circles was to get people to sit down and be in a space where they could actually, they could kind of say what they needed to say. And I feel as though for the people who do show up, and I'm very interested to hear from the delegations as well. So, mind you, it'll be important to hear these voices. But there was such a diverse array of suggestions and thoughts and feelings that were presented out loud in person at the tea circles from this diversity of voices. So, if you were sat in that room, there's no denying the fact that there were people from all of these different opinions who were there and who actually said this stuff out loud. Because I think that some people were concerned, especially with the crane method, people were concerned that like things were being said behind closed doors, and that's valid, I think. To a certain degree, one of the issues that we saw, or one of the, it felt almost like a community trauma, was that people felt like things were done behind closed doors where they weren't able to see. Transparency came up a lot. Obviously, we weren't here during the previous process, and I don't think actually any of you guys were either. So we took that into consideration, but the diversity of opinions was well reflected in those in-person events. So even if we were to just put aside all of the online stuff, if we were to put aside the crane data collection and just look at those conversations we actually had in the room, in the New Hamburg Community Center, in the rec complex, these pieces were all reflected in person there, and I think that is something that people will be able to testify towards. Denise, I'll let you, if you have anything to add.
Thanks so much. I think that the process was definitely a controlled process in terms of keeping people safe, in terms of holding spaces where people felt that they could share. And to give an example of the openness for sharing, in one community tea circle, we were talking about resources that people had come across that might be helpful, and some folks shared some, truth and reconciliation resources with the group that we put on a reading list, and then other people shared, one of the ones that was suggested was a grave error, which is an account of how the sort of deaths at residential schools were sort of created by the media as a bit of a media hoax. And both of these resources were shared in the same conversation in the same room with 40 people around, that there was an openness, and both of those thoughts and opinions were sort of welcome in the room. In terms of information being left out, one of the beautiful things about this team is that it was sort of decentralized, that all of us were sort of feeding into a sort of pot of information that was being filtered back to the working group and filtering back to the community. And so there were lots of opportunities for that information to be decentralized from any one person controlling it, through our team, the three of us, but then also through that sort of ping pong effect between the community and the working group. And then in terms of folks who were left out, I think this process did everything that it possibly could to give people any possible opportunity to engage. We received commentary from you folks in terms of things that you were hearing from your constituents. We received private emails. We had meetings. There was a private inbox that you could send an email to anonymously. There was multiple anonymous surveys. And so for any voices that might have felt like they didn't want to engage in one way, there were multiple other ways for folks to engage. And at some point, because of just the realities, there's budget constraints and those kinds of things, it's up to people to step into the circle and to participate to find some way that they can participate. And we had a conversation with one person who said, how can you ensure that folks who come to me and say to me that they don't feel safe, Benny and I said, please tell them that they can, through you, they could tell us if there's a different way that we could engage. And so I think that we really kept an open mind. We designed to have as many different avenues as possible, and we kept an open mind that if somebody said, hey, I don't want to engage with you this way, I want to engage with you this way, we would meet them however they wanted to participate in this process to ensure that all of the voices were heard.
We will do second rounds of questions after. I'm going to go to Councillor Martin next.
Thank you, through you, Maricel. And I apologize for being late to the meeting, had some travel delays. I first of all wanted to thank Benny and Denise for your work, and for other staff members of Laura I did attend a number of the tea circles declaring that I am a counselor. If other counselors would have also attended, I would have likely left if we would have reached quorum. And so I witnessed what Denise was talking about here in terms of giving space to diverse opinions. And I was there in the tea circles when different opinions were raised. So I wanted to say that I thought this process gave opportunity for anyone in our township, as well as people beyond the township, to voice their opinions, and that's part of what we're hearing in the delegations tonight. So I want to thank Laura, and I appreciate this process.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions at this time that you wanted to ask?
I wanted to make those comments in response to what Councillor Wilkinson was asking his questions.
Okay, very good. And now that everybody but Councillor Sadhu has had a first round, do you have anything that you would like to ask Councillor Sadhu? Okay, so we did have Councillor Dunstall again.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I actually want to echo Councillor Wilkinson's concerns because I heard them too, and it wasn't about the tea circles. I'm not sure for him. It wasn't about the tea circles and the situations where there was public engagement, where everyone was there. It was more along the lines of for the working group. There was some people within the working group that felt that the discussions, it was the facilitation of the discussions, that while discussions were taking place, the facilitators would guide the discussion in a specific way, and that was their concern. So I'd be interested to, and I'm not sure if that's what Councillor Wilkinson had heard, but I would be interested to hear your views on that as well.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I think that when we were facilitating in the working group, because we had such a diversity of opinions, and I know that some of the working group members are delegating tonight, so this, I'm sure, will be reflected also in their delegations, but it was really challenging. And one of the things that we had to do is we had to steer people not necessarily to a certain answer, but to find congruency, which was really challenging for folks. When you read the recommendations, we tried our best to get to recommendations that didn't necessarily say yes or no to the statutes. It's an obvious thing, but that really took into account what people were thinking and feeling, but found a way to to address the concerns without heavily politicizing it. And now I know that the inclusivity piece, I think, it was a little bit tough for folks in terms of feeling as though that was because there was one group of people who were saying, well, if we're going to do this, it has to be inclusive. And then there was another group of people that felt the weight of that requirement of inclusivity. For us, for myself, I guess I'll let you speak to your own experience, but we have to approach things with best practice. And so when you look at something like putting together a history or a historical narrative, the best practice is to have those diverse opinions on history, right? And so we were trying really hard, I think, to balance best practice of making sure people are included and don't feel excluded, while also trying to help people cope with the weight of feeling like inclusivity meant that somebody else was going to be excluded. So it was, admittedly, it was very challenging, and I recognize that some people may have felt that way. I don't know if you have anything else to add or you want to elaborate on that, but yes.
Thank you so much. I think this theme of balance, particularly in the working group, is one that was a bit of a juggling act. The working group had a unique task at hand because they obviously were a group of individuals who were bringing their own experiences into the room, but they also, their task was to interpret the community voice and to synthesize the community voice into these recommendations. Time was tight. We ended up making, adding a couple of extra working group meetings to really sort of get to a place, to get to the end, to get to the recommendations. And that requires a heavily facilitated process to go through, to get from point A to sort of an end place. I think in some of the, if I think back to some of the meetings where there were discussions sort of started to bubble up and started to come to the surface, to rein that in, our job was again to sort of balance that, like, these folks have experiences and opinions of their own, but really their job was to synthesize the community voice, and to bring together the data, not just present their own personal opinions at the table, and that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing for anybody to have an opinion and speak through the voices of other people. And I think that at a couple of points in the process, we as facilitators and the working group as a whole had to really sort of reconcile with what their role was and what the goal was at the outcome. And my hope is that at the end, folks, it seemed like folks ended up satisfied, at the very least, maybe not happy with, but satisfied with what came out of the process.
Thank you.
Can I just add something really quickly? I also want to add that for every, it felt as though for every voice there was an equal and opposite voice, right? And so I think that if you ask, the folks in the working group, at the end of the day, nobody got exactly what they wanted, and also nobody got nothing that they wanted, and that was, it was, the diversity was a daunting task, but I think that's a good point to be made.
Councillor Cressman.
Yes, I would agree. You were set up to fail to a degree because the working group, by definition, was representing multiple voices and multiple views, and then to have them take one step backwards and to encapsulate other views and to present them, that again is a challenge in itself. My thinking as you summarized the process was, maybe you should work for the House of Parliament and try to get 4 different parties to work, or 5 different parties to get them to common ground in the center without having a divisive environment. So it came to mind as you were discussing your task at hand.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, through the chair. No doubt a challenging task, as my colleagues have commented on. I'm curious, with the findings that have been filed here, do you have raw data to support these positions and these findings? Is there meeting minutes? Is there emails? Is there information that can be shared beyond what these written reports are? That, I think, would go a long way in supporting these findings and at least providing the evidence to show how you got there. Is that possible?
Yes, we have the raw data. Hasna's poor fingers, I'm sure, require massage therapy. She's been typing straight for 6 months. We did take copious notes. There is the survey data. We made a decision to not publish all of that data because of the sensitivity around how people shared and how openly people shared, that we didn't think that it was appropriate to enter that into public record, into public space. In some, if we're looking at a transportation master plan, I always pick on transportation master plans, but if we're looking at a transportation master plan in some city, publishing the raw data, publishing the survey data doesn't necessarily affect anybody, and we will append it as part of the reports. We did talk about that in this case and really wanted to be sensitive around that data that was shared. Can it be, could it be accessed? Absolutely, it can be accessed. Could people ask for questions? Minutes are much easier to share, or, facilitation plans are much easier to share, and happy to do so if folks want. But again, we did make a conscious decision to be sensitive around the data that was shared, particularly in those public spaces. In terms of the emails and all of those things, again, they exist. Nothing's being destroyed, nothing's being deleted. It's all there, and would happily share the pieces that people want. But again, we were sensitive around the sort of public sharing of people's data.
Through the chair, as a follow-up, I can respect that you don't want to publicly publish a lot of that information. I think from my perspective, being in the position to make decisions and interpret this, I would request, and I don't know if my colleagues agree, but I would request that I receive that information. I think it would just help better inform the process, and as well, again, provide evidence to support the positions that have been taken here.
Honestly, from a personal standpoint, I also think that that's important. Like, we did go back and forth about, making sure we have that raw data in a bucket, because that was another thing that was being brought up over about the last iteration. So I don't see a problem with that. It's a lot of data. But you know what? That's your job, and I already did it, so.
Through the chair, I mean, in respectfully to looking at what pieces you chose to keep private or want to maintain confidentiality on, I think given our office, where we'd be coming from, that would be respected as well.
So I suppose I would just ask so that all of council can receive that information, and councillors can do with that what they would like. But thank you very much for that. Councillor Martin, did you have anything final that you would like to add before we hear delegations?
I don't think so. I'm assuming that after the delegations, there'll be opportunity for us as council to speak. Is that accurate?
Yes, so like with regular delegations, we can ask the delegates questions. In terms of tonight, I guess you weren't here for the start part, but tonight we're doing the listening component. In terms for us actually deliberating, that's going to take place. Council did pass an amendment to the motion to be at the July 28th meeting. That's because we don't have full council attendance at either of our June meetings. So at that point is when we'll really be deliberating and digging into and discussing as council. But absolutely, if you have questions later tonight after the delegates or additional comments, I'm happy to circulate around to everyone again.
Well, it was just, I know sometimes we say we don't want to debate things before we get to the proper time. And I would have a different opinion than Councillor Wilkinson or maybe Councillor Dunstall based on their questions. I've spoken with people on the working group who were very appreciative of the process and recognizing that there's a diversity of opinion. So I'm just realizing, I think we may be in a debate, and but I don't want to circumvent this process.
Yeah, so the debating and actually pulling apart in council discussing ideas and concepts will be at the July 28th meeting. Tonight is, as we have the consultants in front of us, time to ask those clarifying questions. So we will go to Councillor Sadhu, and then Councillor Cressman, I see, has a question again.
Thanks. I just want to make a quick comment. I know going into this process, I almost looked at it as there would be a quote-unquote referee, where it would be a good job done if both sides are unhappy and both sides are kind of kicking the can down the road and saying we didn't like this. So from what I'm hearing right now, this is kind of the feeling and the vibe I'm getting, so it is encouraging. Like my fellow councillor Cressman said, it is a daunting task. There's no black or white, yes or no. This is going to be a longer process. Obviously, we have to sift through any of the raw data and the findings, but it is an encouraging sign that we have two quote-unquote sides that are unhappy of the way it went. So that shows me that it wasn't catered to one side over the other, and I do look forward to hearing from the delegations too.
Councillor Cressman.
I'll make this quick. Are the 3 consultants going to be in attendance July 28th? I just wanted to make sure that we can ground truth, ask questions when we have our debate.
I don't want to put them on the spot at the moment because we did just change the date on them in this meeting. So I would maybe ask that we can get back to you on that point, even perhaps by the end of the meeting this evening, if we can get answers, but I'm not going to turn it over to you right now in the hot seat. Any other questions or comments at this time then, councillors? Okay, seeing none, as I did note before, we do have 9 registered delegations to speak to us about this item. So I will invite our first delegate, Andrea Berwick, who is joining us virtually this evening to address council. Andrea, you will have 7 minutes.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Andrea.
Okay, good evening, Mayor, councillors, and members of the community. As mentioned, my name is Andrea Berwick, and I'm here tonight to express my strong opposition to continuing the Prime Minister path in any form. As I sit here and listen to what's being said, I really want to voice that I felt I was very involved in this conversation back in 2020, 2021, and I had no idea that these conversations in these tea circles were happening. So I really want to voice that even someone like me who was heavily involved and has a very strong opinion about this, it wasn't advertised in a way that I feel like everyone could access it. And I really wanted to highlight that because I'm here today speaking for the first time to make sure that my opinions are heard. Originally intended to commemorate Canada's political history, the project has faced significant and understandable backlash from communities across the country. It has already been rejected by key institutions such as the University of Waterloo, representing our emerging generations, and Victoria Park in Kitchener, which reflects a broader and more diverse range of voices. These rejections stem from a valid concern about celebrating figures with deeply problematic and devising legacies, particularly regarding their treatment of Indigenous people. I have to ask, why does Wilmot believe it could succeed when others have rightfully walked away? Why do we think we can get it right when respected institutions have determined that no version of this project is appropriate? Who will bear the ongoing costs of this path, not just financially, but socially and emotionally? Vandalism is not only likely, but inevitable. And the price of repairing and securing these installations will continue to fall on us. The inclusion of figures like Sir Johnny MacDonald, who played a central role in establishing the residential school system, is especially troubling. No amount of context can erase the harm these individuals cause. Memorializing them in public spaces risks deepening wounds and division within our community and within our country. This isn't just a local issue. Communities across Canada have rejected similar initiatives, reflecting a growing discomfort with elevating historical figures whose legacies include systematic harm. When Victoria Park in Kitchener and the University of Waterloo both declined its involvement, that signaled a clear shift in public sentiment. Rather than trying to salvage a deeply flawed project, which it feels like the working group document is doing, we have the opportunity to create something new, something that truly reflects Wilmot's unique identity. Why not highlight our township's agricultural heritage, the local linseed oil industry, or other stories that speak to our shared history and values? Political, controversial figures feels misplaced in a community like ours. It's also important to remember that as of July 2021, Wilmot Township Council unanimously voted to remove the remaining statues and discontinue the project. This decision should carry weight. Reopening the issue not only undermines that resolution, but also diverts time, energy, and funds away from more unifying and impactful community initiatives. Requesting funding from local groups, such as the document highlights, I know I'm not going to say this right, but it's the women's group in Wilmot here, for a project with such deep controversy is inappropriate. That support could be far better directed towards inclusive educational and social initiatives that reflect the values of our entire community. Furthermore, without trained full-time staff to provide context and guided visits, the educational goals of the Prime Minister path cannot reliably be achieved. If the goal is to educate, a museum with professional interpretation would be far more suitable venue. but why should Wilmot be responsible for the burden of that cost? I respectfully urge Council to listen to the growing and ongoing concerns of residents, many of which were voiced clearly in 2021 and have, I feel, been left out in the more recent discussions, and bring a definitive end to the Prime Minister path. It feels like the recommendations highlighted in the document aren't leading to the option of a full stop. The document feels very one-sided. How do we bring this project back versus should we continue this project? Thank you for your time and serious consideration.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for joining us. I did just want to make a technical note on the resolution that the former council passed. Yes, although it was to remove the statues and put them in storage at the time, it was to then continue discussions to carry on. So that is what this council is doing. Just wanted to make that technical note. But councillors, does anybody have questions of Andrea? Okay. Seeing none, thank you again for making time to join us, Andrea. And we will invite up our next delegate, and that is Robin Spicer. Robin, I believe, is in person tonight? Yes. Very good. Thank you, Robin, for joining us, and you will have 7 minutes.
Okay. Saguli, hello, my name is Robin Spicer. I am Haudenosaunee, Bear Clan from Oneida Nation of the Thames, people of the Standing Stone. I am a single mother who now resides in New Hamburg. I am the Indian, or I should say savage, that Sir John A. Macdonald tried to erase through genocide. The evidence of genocide of the original people was discovered in May of 2021 in Kamloops. It has been suggested 215 graves could exist at the site. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation had officially documented 51 students who died at the school. Their dates of death range from 1919 until 1971. Thousands of children have been discovered in unmarked graves at residential schools across Canada. Our children died, our families destroyed, because these powerful white men thought that they were a superior race and wanted the Indian problem to be erased. They took our land, our cultures, and our lives. Our history with these oppressors is not the same as your history. The policies that Sir John A. Macdonald founded are still affecting the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We see this racism today with settlers who think that they can own unceded land. The original people of Turtle Island have suffered so much due to colonization. We were starved into submission from our homes to reservations set up by the government. We lost our crops, our hunting grounds, our homes, and our children. This past weekend, we celebrated Mother's Day. And on that day, I reflected how blessed I am to be here and that I am able to see and hold my child. So many other parents are unable to hold their children due to the residential schools. The 60 scoop and the forced sterilization of many Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, transgender, and gender-diverse peoples are examples how the policies of our first Prime Minister have affected us to this day. There are many things that these Prime Ministers did do to make Canada what it is today. But with every positive, there is also a dark negative. And that's what I'm focusing on here today, is the dark negative. I was a participant in the working group for the PM path. I have heard many great ideas for the space and how to return the statues with the understanding that a lot of educational components will need to be addressed. Personally, I do not see how these statues are educational. These statues have created so much divide in this community, and it's going to be expensive to build and maintain. If the statues do make the return, I would like to see Sir John A. Macdonald toppled over with red paint splattered on it. My other thought is to erect a plexiglass panel with the words, "Here once stood the statue of Sir John A. Macdonald," and then an explanation as to why our community chose not to bring him back. Statues honor an individual's past, but these statues are rooted in injustices. We continue to honor these injustices by allowing the statues to hold space. Please remember, there were quite a few spaces that removed him due to his policies against Indigenous peoples, people of color, and the Asian population. Is it right for Indigenous people, people of color, and the Chinese community to be shown that this community, the Wilmot community, still honors the acts of the past that are racist and incredibly harmful? With all the secrets of the past out now, you can't deny what these statues represent. You would never ask an abused person to take space where the abuse took place, whether it be a church or a building with the abuser's name on it. To have a statue or a likeness of that abuser being held up in reverence is insulting and traumatic. Feelings of anger and hurt come to the surface in many Black, Asian, and Indigenous people when they have to walk past a statue that glorifies an architect of segregation and genocide. Statues in public places emphasize that the lives and histories of Black, Asian, and Indigenous people are not valued in spaces that we all share. These statues keep the perpetual racism alive. Is this what we want in our community? I hope not. My voice, an Indigenous voice, needs to be heard and should be at the forefront of this debate. By adding a plaque with the injustices of each Prime Minister is just not good enough. You are still bestowing honor to that individual and raising them up by erecting a statue of them. Wilmot Township is not the home for these statues. Baden is the home for many wonderful, compassionate, and loving individuals who are raising their families in a small, rural setting. Do the residents of Baden want the turmoil and contempt that these statues will bring to the community if this gets approved? Again, respectfully, I hope not. Yogo, thank you. And I want to thank these wonderfully hardworking people. I was obviously one that did not want them back, but I do feel that all voices were heard from all over the spectrum, and they did an amazing job keeping that all together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin, for joining us this evening. And thank you for your work that you did on the working group as well. That's very appreciated. Councillors, were there any questions for Robin? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you again. On to our next delegate, and that is Jack Spicer-Fowler. Jack, thank you for joining us this evening, and you will also have 7 minutes.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Jack. I am 20 years old, and I'm from New Hamburg. My family and I are Bear Clan of Oneida Nation of the Thames, one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I've had the privilege of being a part of the Collective Reflections Future Directions Engagement Working Group that is focused on creating recommendations for continuing the project, and I've had many honest conversations with local community members from all walks of life with various passions and opinions regarding the Prime Minister's path. While in acknowledgement that the recommendations formed between us were created in delicacy and care of the healing journeys that many of us are on as Indigenous peoples, I'd like to shed light to the Council on the further harms this project may inflict on the community of Wilmot if it is to continue. My ancestry and the story of my family has led me to become passionate about my culture, a culture that Sir John Macdonald has deliberately attempted to destroy, as shown in written law of the Indian Act, an act established in 1876 that intended to brutally destroy our sovereignty, exploit our land, and assimilate our people into a white Christianized Canada. With me is a photo of my late grandmother. Her name is Edith May Spicer, formerly Dockstader of Oneida Nation of the Thames in Southwold, Ontario. Her story of survival under the Indian Act is one that often goes unrepresented in written histories of the colonial state of Canada, but it is a story that has intergenerationally changed our family. Here are how Sir John A. Macdonald's Indian Act affected my grandmother Edith's life. The earliest memory she had that she shared with my family was the moment my great-grandfather, Thomas Anthony Dockstader, ushered her into a bush and told her to hide from the Indian agent that was coming to take her away. It was 1939, a time when Indian agents were assigned to reservations to enforce the Indian Act, including the residential school system where Indigenous children were abused and assimilated into white Christian criteria. This also occurred on Oneida Nation of the Thames. In 1951, she ran away from her home due to the living conditions that the Canadian government made her live under, and in shame of her indigeneity from what she was taught in a society that hated Indians. Living off reserve and posing as a German to conceal her true ethnicity, she could not vote until 1960, when First Nations peoples were finally granted the right to vote in federal elections without conditions. In 1963, her Indian status was revoked by default when she married my grandfather, a non-Indigenous Welsh immigrant, because at the time the Canadian government no longer recognized Indigenous women as Indigenous once they married a settler. These are all examples of how the Indian Act attempted to erase who she was. Given that a continuation of the project would involve Indigenous leadership and consultation, as stated in the recommendations, it is still difficult for me to be optimistic that any local content glorifying the first Prime Minister would not still blatantly harm Black, Indigenous, and racialized people marginalized by the Canadian government. It is not only a historical oppression, but a present oppression that impacts us all. Because of the actions of Sir John A. Macdonald, I did not grow up with my Oneida language. My mother did not grow up knowing her ancestry. Our family did not reunite on Oneida Nation until 2011, 60 years after my grandmother Edith had last seen her aunts. We are still picking up the pieces and reconnecting to our culture, which is proving to be a lifelong fight and journey. My hope within sharing the personal impacts that the first Prime Minister has inflicted on my family is to bring an understanding to community members who do not share our lived experiences. In a township that already struggles with racism, queerphobia, and xenophobia within its social environment, I fear that Wilmot is not the correct venue for amplifying histories of settler colonialism. Education is imperative to unifying our communities, and yes, I do believe that we can all find ourselves passionate in sharing the stories of our settler ancestors. I am proud to be Welsh, as I am proud to be Haudenosaunee. However, the colonial state of Canada does not represent me or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The Prime Minister clearly does not represent me. May I also remind the Council that Canada does not represent this land that the Prime Minister's statue will be on, that is recognized as Treaty 3 territory and rightfully belongs to the Mississaugas of the Credit. There must be other ways to educate on and celebrate settler histories that are viable, affordable, and convenient and respectful to people on all sides of history. As the Prime Minister's path has already inflicted harm on local families, it would be a blatant act of disrespect and total disregard to our healing process if this project resumes. I ask you, the Council, to consider Black, Indigenous, and racialized residents with care when making decisions regarding the project's process, and to disallow it from continuing altogether. This action would allow us to finally debrief from the initial harms caused in 2021, and we can finally have the opportunity of beginning a new chapter of healing within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, for joining us and for sharing your experience. And thank you also for the work, for being on the working group. Councillors, any questions of Jack? Okay, seeing none, thank you again. On to our next delegate, and that is Karen Donan. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name. Thank you very much, Karen, for joining us this evening, and you will have 7 minutes.
Okay, so my comments are before I came tonight. Members of Wilmot Council, thank you for being on Wilmot Council. Thank you for the opportunity to verbally give some thoughts regarding the Prime Minister's path. My verbal thoughts are a supplement to my written submission dated May 6, 2025. My level of support for the Prime Minister's path in Wilmot Township has diminished over the years as the controversy has increased and the cost to Wilmot town taxpayers has increased. And when I say the controversy, I'm very upset that people are getting hurt by these things, and we're so insistent that we're going to be putting them back up. I think it is important for Wilmot Township to know their order of priorities and act accordingly. Where on Wilmot's priority list is trying to teach Canadian history appropriately by displaying statues of prime ministers outdoors? Does it trump so many other things, including how much money it's going to cost? I feel we have given the Prime Minister's path more than a fair chance with the $175,000 in tax-supported dollars Wilmot Township has already spent on it. This amount would be substantially more if the cost of Wilmot staff Prime Minister path-related time since 2016 would be added on. Funding of many millions of dollars would be required to get statues of the first 22 prime ministers up. Statues alone cost about $1 million each. If funding or if interest dries up at any stage, Wilmot Township will be stuck with an uncompleted prime minister's path. Accordingly, thought should be given to obtain guaranteed funding to put all 22 Prime Minister's statues up before putting the first statue up. As well, there has been so much controversy regarding statues of Sir John A. Macdonald. Currently, there is only one of at least 10 Sir John A. Macdonald statues in Canada left up and uncovered outdoors. It is located on Parliament Hill. If you are looking for a viable, practical option of what to do with the statues, please consider the following. The estimate is the statues should last at least 100 years outside. Put them inside, and the statues, as well as accompanying educational components, can last thousands of years, since they are not exposed to weather-related deterioration. Plus, there isn't the cost of weather-related maintenance. Plus, there are many more options for the educational component and varying it. Plus, there is much less risk of vandalism. The federal government continues to invest in teaching and displaying Canadian history appropriately. This is in keeping with the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, 2015. Wilmot Township could donate the existing 9 statues to the federal government, who already own many buildings where one or more of these statues could be displayed appropriately. An example of a possible placement might be the William Lyon Mackenzie King statue at his childhood home located at the Woodside National Historic Site in Kitchener. If it is decided to continue with more statues, some federally owned buildings would have room for 22+ statues, such as the Canadian Museum of History or the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. If Wilmot Township is required to pay shipping costs for the 9 statues, it should not be too costly, since Wilmot Township has already paid $29,000 to remove the 5 statues that were up. That means all 9 statues are in storage, and 4 of the statues are still in their original shipping crate. Perhaps the federal government would pay some or all shipping cost, or Wilmot Township could access a grant that would pay some or all shipping costs. This option will minimize the hurt statues can cause people, since qualified experts hired by the federal government will be involved in deciding on an appropriate location, educational component, etc. This option is a workable solution with little expense for Wilmot Township that can be implemented in a short period, possibly less than a year. This option will help to prevent the current 9 statues from being damaged or destroyed by vandalism. This option enables the Prime Minister's path to be put to rest as much as possible for Wilmot Township. I don't think the Indigenous will oppose this option. I feel some of them are hurt every time they hear Wilmot Township is still thinking about putting the statues back up. If you decide to go ahead with this plan,
1 minute remaining.
Perhaps Wilmot Township's MP Tim Lewis might be able to give some helpful suggestions for contacts, redonation, government grants, etc. Unless someone can come up with a better viable solution, there should be no good reason why pursuing this option should cause an explosion or hard feelings. Closing. Wilmot Council, please use your elected position to make wise decisions regarding the future of the Prime Minister's path in Wilmot Township. If you are interested, there are more Prime Minister's path related thoughts I am willing to share with you individually or as a group in a less formal setting. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Karen, for coming in, and thank you for your correspondence that you sent earlier. Councillors, any questions? Seeing none, thank you again for joining us. I will invite up our next speaker, and that is Catherine Lindman. Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us. And
Thanks for having me. Council, thank you for hearing my remarks. My name is Katerina Lindman. I'm a citizen of Wilmot and also a member of the Wilmot Ecumenical Working Group on Indigenous and Settler Relations. The reaction to the earlier installation of the statue of former Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald shows, as one resident put it, that history is complicated. While we might learn in school that he was a hero that brought our country into being, others see him as someone who caused much harm with his policies that coerced Indigenous people to lose their identity and to be assimilated into mainstream Canadian culture. The Prime Minister's Path report was based on thorough community engagement, and it shows the necessary steps to have a Prime Minister's Path that is fair to all in the community. The recommendation seems reasonable and includes what support the township is willing to provide. Basically, no township operational funds are to be used. Instead, a steering committee is to be formed, and this committee will need to create a funding plan for the project. The statues must not be put somewhere where people see them passively, but instead in a place where a choice has been made to see them. That makes sense because we do not want to cause harm to people that may be hurt by what these statues represent to them and their community. I want to highlight what the staff report said. Parks and facility staff who were responsible for maintaining and cleaning the statues, as well as staff within the administration building, were subjected to harassment regarding the statues. These situations have the potential to occur again if statues are placed on township property. If the project proceeds, there is a risk that it will be done in a way that doesn't advance truth and reconciliation. The project needs to be done with care, and raising money will be a significant part of the project. The display itself will need to be done in consultation and partnership with Indigenous people and advance truth and reconciliation. This may not be easy. If the project does not advance truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, it should not proceed. And if the project does not proceed, our community still needs to address the harm felt by many in our community due to the statues. Truth and reconciliation needs to be foremost.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Any questions, councillors? Okay, seeing none, thank you again for joining us and sharing your thoughts. I will now invite up our next delegate, and that is Barry Wolf. Barry, thank you for joining us, and you will have 7 minutes.
Sorry. Good evening, Council and all. The consultants have produced a voluminous 3-part report with recommendations for Council's consideration. It reflects dozens of methods of getting public input from many hundreds of citizens, elders, and experts from Wilmot and afar. The sources list is apparently impressive, and tonight you hear from only 9 more. On page 2 of the cover report, CAO 2025-10, the writer opines that the current report is in response to the removal of the statues in 2021. Rather, I suggest that it is supposed to be a staff report that introduces the working groups and consultants' combined efforts to address the direction given by Council at its September 23, 2024 Council meeting that included 3 THATs. Go back to the first one. The first THAT was the RFP to hire the consultant. The second THAT was the terms of reference. And the third THAT was this, that the terms of reference comment on all options with respect to the future of the Prime Minister's Path project, including asking the question, does the township dispose of the statues, and if so, how? Alternatively, does the township continue to display the statues, and if so, how? And all other options. After reading the 3-part report, I conclude that the product before us tonight attempts to address the third THAT. Councillor Cressman added the final part, and in all other options considered, which brought Council into unanimity, and it appears to me that the working group has addressed all 3 parts as directed by Council. Pages 2 and 3 of the CEO cover report staff feedback section outlines some concerns that Council can address successfully. This corporation is responsible for providing a safe workplace, and that can be assured with Council's appropriate directives. The corporation has invested tens of thousands of dollars in security strategies since 2020. The cover report also opines that the recommendation of the working group is beyond the capacity of the current organization. That may be true given the current organization of the corporation, but it should be recognized the township has been able to compile between 2015 and 2019 over 700 Prime Minister's Path-related documents, 400 of which were recently released to me through an FOI request, that include educational resources from places like Nipissing University, architectural drawings, which you will see eventually, of variations of a site plan, and schedules of presentations involving well-known Canadians, including Margaret Trudeau. This project, I believe, is doable. It should be noted that Report CAO 2024-03 in February 26, 2024, CAO at the time, CAO Chambers reported, quote, "The Manager of Communications and Strategic Initiatives position has been hired. The Manager of Communications and Strategic Initiatives has experience in community engagement. That position has been restructured away. I advocate that Council should direct staff to again reorganize within existing FTE to recreate that position, but with a new person. This skilled professional may provide leadership and coordination on tasks such as developing an in-house strategic plan and liaison with any structures that Council may create to potentially implement the suggestions and recommendations in this 3-part report. It appears to me that the working group has addressed all 3 options as directed by Council, and this package, the recommendations deserve close review and feedback from Wilmot's citizens. Now to the reports. There's a lot of excellent material in these 3 documents. My comments and suggestions below, 15 of them, hang in there, are intended to build on them as Council deliberates. I recommend that Council, 1, move forward toward a goal of providing a safe space where structured opportunities for listening, sharing, learning, and engagement in reflecting on history, identity, and belonging may occur. That's the blue slide that you just saw. 2, create a mutually binding legal relationship with CreateScape Waterloo to facilitate a fundraising foundation with legal charitable opportunities. 3, In coordination with CreateScape, consider establishing a foundation board of directors, potentially at arm's length from the corporation, but coordinating with it, strategic initiatives manager. 4, solicit Wilmot citizens to name the project. 5, solicit local, individual, and corporate donors for naming opportunities. 6, acquire a suitably sized parcel of land in Wilmot, preferably in Baden, close to the castle and museum. Charitable donations, including from landowners, can leverage willingness to give by those who have resources able to donate, especially if they get a tax receipt. Set up financial accounts that allow donors to contribute to the project. This could be in the form of a subscription list, where individuals and corporations make regular monthly donations on a fixed regular amount that is deposited automatically each month, such as you do for your hydro and your phone bill and your taxes.
1 minute remaining.
You kidding me? 1? This will flow through the township corporate accounts and you get a tax receipt. Another one, a funding alternative is DCs, development charges. At present, developers provide part and as part of their developments, or they make payments in lieu of. You could manipulate the in lieu of part because this would be a park. Future consultations, I suggest you contact the Saugeen First Nation located in Southampton. It was there where most of the people were displaced by the Iroquois, and they ended up in that area up there. And I suggest you contact the Chief Conrad Ritchie up there. He's a good man. 9, identify potential ways to expand the visitation sites. 10, create a communication strategy for promoting tourist visits. 11, contact the Stratford Festival for how you can coordinate. 12, work with the Board of Trade regarding long-term plans for provision of support services required by potential tourists. And part of that might be an alternative bus tour spin-off to New Hamburg to view the homes of Marie Voisin's books.
Barry, if you could please summarize in 2 sentences, as your time is now up.
Okay. I'd like the township to post the Prime Minister's Path documents on the website that I've been able to research through a Freedom of Information requirement. Hire a manager of strategic initiatives. And remember that this is not just an Indigenous project. It is not a settler project. It is a Wilmot project on land we call Canada. I believe it's about honoring not about honoring specific figures from our past. It's about educating as many people as possible, providing opportunities to hear the stories of others' experiences, and through learning, develop mutual respect and reconciliation. So end of the reading. Thank you.
Thank you. I should have clarified, not a run-on sentence, but thank you very much, Barry. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Dunstall actually has a question for you,
Mr.
Barry.
Wolf. Mr. Wolf, can I ask you a question?
Yes, Councillor Dunstall.
As one of the loudest voices concerning staff, in addition to staff for our budget, I just want to make sure I understood you correctly when you asked, or when you said one of your suggestions was adding strategic initiative manager. Is that correct?
It would be replacing one that has been restructured away. So you just bring back that position that already existed. During the previous CAO's tenure, there was the hire of a manager of strategic initiatives and planning and communications, I believe. Kelly, is that her name? And didn't work out. Anyway, that position was restructured away, I believe. So within the present, it was redistributed somehow within the total complement. I would suggest that within the total FTE complement, you restructure, reallocate, and designate that position. And there's your coordinator.
Thank you.
Any Councillor Cressman?
Yeah. Excuse me, through you, Mayor, which I didn't mention earlier. Barry, as a former educator, it was brought to my attention in discussing this with some of my constituents. Again, the individual was a former retired teacher, brought that it's often through controversy that we learn, and we listen to different voices, and we hear things that we weren't exposed to. listening to different lived experiences this evening have been very informative for me. And my concern is to not have an opportunity where there is controversy, and different perspectives, if we don't allow that. So what's your view on the idea of tension? There's a kind of a constructive tension rather than a destructive tension.
Yeah, my personal opinion was that without it, you've got tapioca pudding. It goes down okay, but you're not left with anything really nutritious and nothing to grow on, really. You need something in balance. And I've heard some strong voices. We've heard some very strong voices here this evening. And I would suggest that there are probably hundreds of others, I'll just make it up, not yet heard. Mm-hmm. And that's a shame.
Here.
And the controversy that may be going through our individual minds as we hear a different position expressed, but when we hear it in the context of another person's lived experience, which goes back generations, is very meaningful. And if this is the only opportunity that this person has to express that, that's a shame. Like, that voice should have, and others like it, should have an opportunity to be heard and seen and visited and deliberated and sat down beside and talked about. And my obvious bias, you can hear it, is this project has the potential. We've been at it since 2013, so a couple of months or a couple of years, we're looking at an extensive project, but the potential for the township and the bigger world that we live in is great. And financing through tourism, to hear those diverse voices, you could get, I'm not picking on anybody, but he's asked me about diverse voices. You get a busload of special cultural group from Toronto coming in, and they have a chance to visit the site locations specific to, say, the Chinese workers' dilemma. Like, you can custom this. And CreateScape's got money. They've got connections. They have produced, with Nipissing, resources on all sorts of stuff. And that's been sitting around in the archives since 2019. This should see the light of day. And I'm disappointed that the working group didn't receive that through the project coordinator.
Any additional questions, councillors? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much,
You've
Barry,
heard enough
for
from me.
joining.
Thank you.
I will now invite our next delegates, and that is Pat and Dennis Mighton. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and you will have 7 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Salonen and councillors. Thank you for putting the Prime Minister's path on your agenda and for initiating the community engagement process. Thanks also to the LURA team for facilitating the engagement process and providing several opportunities for us to express our opinions and listen to others. Also to the working group, thanks for the things that you have done on our behalf. We are Dennis and Pat Mighton, and we are here to speak in support of returning the Prime Minister's path, or the Prime Minister's statue, to public display in Wilmot Township and continuing this project. Our friend Jim Roger, a longtime Wilmot resident and one of the founders of the Prime Minister's path, died 1 year ago last week. Jim would be pleased to see that this worthy project has been given another chance. It will benefit Wilmot Township in many ways. Now, recently, we have seen a surge of Canadian pride. The Prime Minister's path, or whatever we call it in the future, has the potential to become a unique national treasure and a source of pride for all Canadians.
The statues are a lesson in history. Through these past leaders and their accomplishments, we can learn the story of Canada from Confederation on. We can examine the qualities that made them effective leaders, or perhaps in many cases, not so effective leaders. The educational component can be professionally written and will complement the Ontario school curriculum. It will be readily accessible to casual passersby and available to those who wish to investigate further. The statues are a valuable art collection with work by renowned sculptors from across Canada, including Wilmot's own Ruth Abernethy. The intrinsic artistic value of the statues and of art in public places is important. The statues are a tourist attraction. Although there is no charge to visit the Prime Minister's, tourists will spend money at local establishments such as Castle Kilbride, Wilmot restaurants, gas stations, overnight accommodation. The statues will add a potential tourist revenue and economic value to our township.
Now, the working group report suggests a path forward with recommendation in 6 areas. I would like to comment on each. First of all, the governance and structure. The working group recommend a community steering committee to oversee all aspects of the project. We suggest that members of the steering committee should be volunteers who have knowledge and expertise in a variety of areas, i.e. historians, legal knowledge, fundraising expertise, educators, and artistic expertise. Representation on the committee from the Woodland Cultural Centre in Brantford, lost my page, would be very helpful. Number 2, funding. Financial sponsorship is essential, and fundraising would be the responsibility of the steering committee. They must look for donations, local, provincial, and national. Number 3, inclusion. An Indigenous perspective must be included as part of a collaborative approach from the start, not as a patronizing gesture and afterthought. Number 4, education. The educational component will evolve. It must be accurate and comprehensive, covering significant events during each Prime Minister's term. Some events will install pride, and others will make us ashamed. All will help us learn about our past and about the men and women who have helped guide us through it. Detailed information can be presented on permanent plaques and through creative, imaginative, interactive approaches that bring history to life. Number 5, the location. We believe the land beside this township administration building is the ideal location. Castle Kilbride, former home of entrepreneur and Member of Parliament James Livingston, is already a National Historic Site that draws visitors to Wilmot. The Prime Minister's Path statues would be a perfect synergistic partner to the castle. Appropriate landscaping, such as a cedar hedge, could shield statues from public view. A few attractive arches would create welcoming entrance points. An accessible walkway around the perimeter outside the protective greenery would provide an equally attractive path through the site for those who wish not to view the statues. Number 6, truth and reconciliation. We cannot undo the past, but we can acknowledge harm that was done. The calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission must be considered throughout, particularly in the educational component and in the location and the design of the site.
Moving on now to the acting CAO Clark's staff report. We were at first disappointed with the seemingly negative tone of the staff report. Mr. Clark raises concerns about the feasibility of undertaking this project. He cites
1 minute remaining.
He cites insufficient financial and human resources and the fact that such a project is not within the mandate of a municipality. As we read on, however, where are you? As we read on, We were quite encouraged to see that the staff report also includes ways to address these challenges and to overcome many of these concerns. An independent community steering committee could be established, which would function much like a nonprofit board, overseeing the work. Council and staff may have a role in supporting the work as a partner, but not as the direct owner.
So in conclusion, Mayor Salonen and councillors, we believe that these statues have the potential to become a unique national treasure. And we ask you not to let this opportunity slip away. Yes, there are challenges, but they're not insurmountable. We hope you will find a way to return the Prime Minister's path to Baden, not only for the benefit of our community, but for that of future generations as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis and Pat. Any questions, councillors? Oh, Councillor Cressman? Sorry, I don't know if that was a question or a wave hello.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to hear your voice. I was surprised not to see it on the delegation list, but glad to hear your comments. And are you going to volunteer?
We're too old. I'd love to, Stuart. I would love to.
We're past there before, that's before D.
May I say something? May I say a thank you to the Spicers? All the time that we went through this turmoil back in the early 20s, one of our most serious concerns that we never had the opportunity to hear directly from any Indigenous members of our community. We were really sad about that. I mean, we were very supportive of the project, obviously, but we didn't hear your voices at that time, and I really, really appreciate hearing you this evening, so thank you. Thanks for allowing me to say that.
You're welcome. I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for joining us. We will call on our next delegate, and that is Caleb Jukes. Caleb, thank you for joining us, and you will, like everyone else, have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Wow, it's a bit like being on the bridge of the Enterprise up here, actually. A little bit daunting, but anyways. First off, I want to say thank you. I was a member of the working group, for anyone who didn't know that, and thank you so much to the three of you for all the organization and everything. Anyways, Jesus sent messengers on ahead who went on into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them sharply. What we see here is just one example of the apostles in the Bible completely not understanding the things and being absolute knuckleheads. And you can turn to any page of the Gospels and see this. When writing these histories, though, they had the opportunity to just not write these things down and say instead the disciples loved the Samaritans just as Jesus did. But they didn't do that. They kept the endlessly embarrassing events in there. And it's my belief that the Prime Minister's path should act in a similar way. Certainly a lot of things were done in the past by previous Prime Ministers that are embarrassing to behold now, but it's really not wise for us to ignore those things, as some of our current delegates said. A big part of why the path was attacked is because it shows and reminds people of some of the terrible things that them, their ancestors, their family members, anyone might have gone through. But it's my belief we have to continue to be reminded of these things as people who did not experience them so that they don't happen again or don't continue to happen. Take the women's right to vote. Certainly those in power resisted that for many years. The science was decided. Women's brains were smaller and they shouldn't be allowed to vote at the end of the 19th century. Well, it's a good thing the science changed because now women have the right to vote and now Indigenous people have the right to vote. And that is very wonderful. And I'm glad we have that. there. We can now look back and say these things did not happen as soon as they should have, but they did happen. And this person was a prime minister when it happened, and this person was a prime minister before it happened, and he voted against it. Such things like that. I happen to think Justin Trudeau was one of the worst prime ministers we have ever had. But when he visited New Hamburg a few years ago, it did not prevent me from shaking his hand and simply saying, I disagree with basically everything you've done, but as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome here. So I would welcome his statue in the midst of our other past prime ministers, despite disagreeing with a lot of the things that he did. I also recently saw a video of an announcement that all cars built before the year 2000 were to be phased out of usage, effective June 1st. So it was a video of Mark Carney making the announcement. Now, I dislike this man as well. But it was natural for me to think, oh yes, of course he would do that. And if anyone knows me, they know why I dislike that. But it only took me a couple of minutes to realize that the video was fake. It was an AI thing. It wasn't real. But the thing is, there's a part of me that was very disappointed, and I didn't want to believe that he didn't say that, because we as humans tend to like to make caricatures of the people that we already don't like, and living in this world now where we have the internet, it's a feedback loop. It's an endless feedback loop. And we want to believe that people are as bad as we think they are. With life-size, not larger than life, but life-size statues of past leaders or leaders of our country and snippets of their stories and what they did as prime ministers, that makes it more difficult to erase history. History textbooks can be changed by governments with a little notice, and they do get updated all the time. I mean, we see that all the time, but we have right here, it's difficult to change the statues. Like, we know it's difficult to get rid of them. And so that's why I think it's a good thing to have this in a public space, hidden, but public. We don't want to cause harm to people by having these here. But it's also, I think, a good thing to be able to reflect on the harm that has been caused. Everyone is flawed. Humans are flawed. We should be able to show the good and bad things that Canada, as a created colony, has done, and why not here? We have some space. We have the statues somewhere. So I agree with Pat and Dennis. I think that it could be a great national treasure, and even better, it's a national treasure that Nicolas Cage can't steal because they're too heavy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Councillors, any questions? Seeing none, thank you again for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. I will now invite up our final delegate for this evening, and that is Glenn Mathers, and I believe Glenn is joining us virtually this evening. Glenn, are you online?
I am.
Wonderful. We can hear you now. You are welcome to begin. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you so much. Now, I'll be brief. Thank you so much for your time tonight. The first time I wish to comment on is the staff report regarding the Prime Minister's Path Working Group recommendations. It was submitted by Greg Clark, and at the time he was the acting CEO. The document was dated May 12th. That's today's date. When was the report drafted and submitted to council, as Mr. Clark is no longer the CEO? So that's a question I'd like to have a response to at some point later. The report states, staff within the administration building were subjected to harassment regarding the statues. It goes on to say that members of the public brought their feelings about the installation and removal of the statues into the public buildings and targeted staff. There were many council meetings, many, and it was never brought up that anybody was harassed about this. It's very interesting that that was not brought up in the past. The report does not identify if harassment took place on one occasion or on multiple times. The report also fails to describe if the harassment was verbal or physical. For most people, Mr. Clark's report is the first time any of us in the community have heard or learned about staff being harassed. And the question is why? Let's go back to some of the history in the community. In 2016, the first statue of the project was unveiled. Hundreds of people gathered to the event. Many took pictures of the Sir John A. Macdonald with the two chairs. The statue was titled The Conversation. That's why the two chairs were there. In 2016, the late Jim Roger, former co-coordinator of the Prime Minister's Path project, stated, "We want to look," and listen to this very carefully, "we want to look at not just our prime ministers, but the successes and failures of our country and how it influences all of us looking toward the future." I'll read that again if you want later. The statement exemplifies the nature of this project. Brightscape, a charitable group, has donated approximately $1 million towards the statues so far. 3 more statues were installed in 2017. They were Robert Borden, Lyle Mackenzie King, and Lester Pearson. Next, if we can bring up a picture, please, on the screen. In 2018, a statue of King Campbell was installed in the Prime Minister's Path. Here we see 3 members of council, of Wilmot Council, posing with the first female Prime Minister of Canada, and the only one still to date. Early in 2020, Jim Roger addressed Wilmot Council meeting and talked about the arrival of 3 more statues. Councilmember Holman, who's seen in this picture, spoke highly of the project and was excited about the future of the Prime Minister's Path. Not too long afterwards, Council Holman did an about-face and was leading the charge to dismantle the project that she once hailed. The change of heart was never addressed by her. The statues in the Prime Minister's Path were there for historic purposes and not there to be worshipped or idolized. Each statue simply demarcated the term of each Prime Minister's time in office. Understanding the past, the good and the bad, frames an understanding of the present. How many people have said to their children, "Learn from your mistakes"? And that's something we should all listen to very carefully. How can one truly appreciate and understand truth and reconciliation without knowledge of Canadian history? That's something else we should all take to heart. Today, Canadian patriotism is at levels not seen for a very long time. That's thanks in part to some comments made by the U.S. President, but this is a wonderful time to embrace the value of history of this project in Wilmot. The other thing we need to consider is the economic impact to Wilmot for the tourism if we have these statues put back in place and have a full history of Canada here in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Just a technical note to your question about dates and titles on reports. The reports, when they are generated, they are dated for the council meeting that they are going to. They are, however, technically generated prior, obviously, as the agenda is posted. So it is post-dated to the date that the meeting is, and the title reflected at the time the role that was held. So just to clarify that for your question. Council, were there any questions for our delegate? Councillor Dunstall?
Actually, thank you, Glenn. And this is actually to all of the delegates tonight who were very eloquent in their thoughts and in their perspectives. And I just want to comment, I know that for people at home, they may not see this, but I've watched the delegates in the audience who have opposing views, but who smiled when humor was presented and seemed to be very welcoming to each other. So I just wanted to note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions of our delegate councillors? Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Glenn, for joining and for sharing your comments on this topic. So that does come to the end of our delegation portion. And I, similar to Councillor Dunstall, wanted to express gratitude to everyone who's in the room tonight, but also who has come and participated throughout this entire engagement process, and as well as all the processes that happened before. I'm really pleased that we're able to have this discussion and have it in a meaningful way forward, and recognizing that there are still, of course, varying opinions and very different experiences as to how people are impacted by this project. So I really appreciate everyone's ability to come and to express your thoughts and opinion. I think that they really do add to certainly the task at hand before council. With that in mind, Council is not making any decisions on this tonight, nor are we debating this tonight. That will take place pending the approval of this motion. That will take place at the July 28th Council meeting. And next steps will be determined by Council, hopefully at that meeting as well. And I can confirm that our consultants will be able to attend the July 28th meeting. I know that that was a question of Council. So with that all being said, any final questions? I'm mainly looking for questions that councillors may want brought back to the 28th meeting to help with deliberation or discussion, noting that councillors can also ask at any point between now and the 28th for additional information to be brought forward, and noting that we are getting the raw data provided to council. Councillor Cressman?
Yes, I think it goes without saying that some of the delegations, or all of the delegations that presented this evening, their material is available on videotape, YouTube, and it likely would behoove us as a council to listen again to that, because it certainly was very compelling. So I think it's that those perspectives and the experiences that were laid out are very important as we deliberate on this project moving forward.
Thank you. Just quickly, the raw data, I mean, I know you have suggested it's quite substantive, so I'm just wondering how quickly we could get it so that we can actually start looking through it prior to the July meeting.
I think what I'll do is Haz and I will chat quickly. We just had a quick message exchange. She feels like she can easily pull it together, but I think what I'll do is I'll send you sort of a list of what there is, and just get a sense of what you want. Like if you want every single email that we received, it's a lot of data. And I don't know how I'm going to get all of that data to you, but I'll send you a list of what we've got. You can tell me what you want, and then we'll be able to turn it around fairly quickly.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Through the chair, I would ask as well one of our delegates who's obtained information from the past in the project, would you be willing to share that with all of council as well?
I have it in the form of a USB attached disk. I was told that there are 700 documents. I've received about 400 of them, so there are 300 outstanding, but they are in the possession of the township. So I can give you the USB, or you can get the USB from the clerk.
Yes, with that, if it came from the FOI, we can get that information from staff.
Through the chair, excellent.
400 on the USB from the clerk, and the other 300 are FOI somehow.
Thank you. Any other questions then before we vote on this, councillors? All right, so again, just to refresh everyone, because it's been a while since I read it, the recommendation is that the report be received for information and that the Wilmot Prime Minister's Path Working Group recommendations to council as attached, as attachment 1 be received for council consideration, and that council refers this report and working group recommendations to the July 28th council meeting, that is of 2025, for further clarity. I will call the question then. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. I did also want to note that on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but May 28th, we have an additional community meeting on this that our consultants are hosting. So again, another opportunity for your input. This was designed to be put in after we have heard delegations, seen the recommendations formally presented. This, like I said, will be executed by our consultants, and you can find more information on the Township website, or you can give a call to the Township office to receive those details. So please do either continue to engage with that, or if you for the first time are engaging, that's another opportunity. The Prime Minister's Path email address also remains open at this time. So again, if you would like another way to engage and have your voice heard in this process, please do reach out through that. And of course, reaching out to your councillors or myself is another opportunity to continue to engage. And of course, you can attend our July 28th meeting, and you have the opportunity to delegate there as well, should you want to add your voice to the conversation.
Point of order, just the venue where that May meeting is being held, New Hamburg Community Center, is that correct? Or Rec Center? We've had one at each.
The Wilmot Rec Center. Thank you very much, Councillor. I was trying, without knowing the location, saying find details online, but thank you for clarifying. With that, because it's a special council meeting, I've chosen not to do announcements this evening, so we will jump into our confirmatory bylaw. May I have a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Dunstall, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. And a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Cressman. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Have a good evening, everyone.